but you are a bad boy Yardie. And bad boy Yardies are supposed to know how to get rid of bodies.
While Part 1 discussed the lore and the racial world of Gemstone, Part 2 will address how a lack of clear direction regarding the reality of these circumstances has led to mixed messaging in storylines, character roleplay, interactions, and reactions. While I don't believe there is ill intent behind the approach taken, the supposed safe way of changing detailed elements and conditions due to outside pressures without a clear plan has caused more harm than good and has created more confusion among a player base with decades or even a generation of experience. Gemstone is 35 years old, which technically makes it eligible to run for president. That's a very long time. Add in the millennia of lore, and it shouldn't be surprising that these things don't change randomly, nor should characters dismiss their own experiences and situations to protect the feelings of those under scrutiny. This video aims to do several things. First, we'll define what mixed messaging regarding pressures and responses to racism involving Gemstone, whether it's lore, whether it's storylines, interactions, mechanics, etc. Second, it'll give consideration to the efforts and the effects made to rectify matters without acknowledging what got us here in the first place, and explain why this is problematic, and I'll be referring to Chesterton's defense regarding that. And third, I'll cite examples from stories that have crippled both player and GM interaction, and this will be the bridge to the next video. Where do we go from here? Mixed messaging refers to the superficial responses that aim to address aspects of racism without confronting its root causes. Although efforts have been made, results are often confusing, ineffective, and fragmented. At the start of 2023, or 5123 in the Gemstone IV timeline, various changes occurred both in lore and in character. However, without a consensus on Gemstone IV's racism, pockets of confusion and frustration persist because there is no agreement on whether or not racism is still present. If it's in the past, as many suggest, then these corrections are unnecessary. If it remains a part of the lore in the world, then a comprehensive plan should be implemented to fix the issue. Instead, the current approach relies on a shallow understanding of the complex racial lore, which weakens the effort. Well-meaning but arbitrary fixes tend to ignore the core problem and often serve as band-aids rather than addressing the root cause. On one side, changes are made to fix an undefined problem, which resonates differently with those who notice it, often without understanding what originally caused the issue. On the flip side, opponents of change feel the world is slipping away and perceive these adjustments as attempts to appease a vocal minority. You'll hear those people often state, "It's just a game." The result is often a convoluted and disjointed process that frustrates everyone. Advocates for change feel marginalized by what many see as piecemeal actions. Meanwhile, those who want the game to retain those tropes believe it is losing its purpose, claiming that those efforts come from a woke mindset and aim to reflect current society due to knee-jerk reactions from real-world events. In the middle are those who think a simple sweeping of the rug would suffice to address decades-long problems. Most unfortunate are the efforts and intentions shown by some GMs who recognize the struggles and have taken steps to create an inclusive atmosphere. However, due to a lack of understanding or acknowledgement of the power of lore, most well-meaning actions, even after a milder climate from a few years ago, tend to generate more controversy and debate, creating a cycle that repeats itself. Those most affected by racial issues feel it isn't enough, or worse, that it isn't genuine. Those unaffected believe enough has been done. Frustration and confusion lead GMs to give conflicting answers. Not everyone shares the same perspective or aligns with Wyron's vision. As a person of color, I can only share my frustrations. Often, real-world change is handled similarly, and that is, without the disenfranchised voice, and often not for our benefit. It tends to address the problems, but does little to truly solve them. This has fostered a jaded skepticism about whether our perspective even matters. Whether it's minority figures in office or footage of police brutality, the outcome is often the same. Someone gets acquitted, and the call for change starts again, or positive action occurs, but the community waits for the next incident or the remnants of the last. In short, we often treat the symptoms rather than disease. Critiquing it from a distance only causes those with little interest or understanding, or feeling personally slighted, to lash out. Words get cherry-picked, assumptions are made, generalizations are drawn. You ever wonder why I chose this format? To address this through a video essay instead of writing it down? Now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.
What we have now are conflicting ideas. Chasten's edict has been rescinded, so let's forget the last 812 years of oppression and any storylines or angles that may have influenced the plight of the half-elves. Erase the ambient history, but ignore what your eyes have seen. Participate in GM storylines, but don't you dare mention the past that may have shaped your characters, or you might harm players' feelings. If something offends you, ignore it. Ignore the lore. And whatever you do, never, ever bring personal experiences into the fold. Racial tension? Denied. Everyone gets along. Everyone lives in harmony. No one should worry or be suspicious. No one should question or resent. All can be explained as simple misunderstandings of races and cultures. Having an explanation of all these things is enough. To borrow a term from Elanthia, this, along with many other things in the world of roleplay, has created what she refers to as gray goop. She provided several definitions, some of which I would like to cover in other relevant topics, but I'll stick with this definition. Gray goop has varying degrees of thickness, and it's the situation in which there is no such thing as bad guys, because either A, they all have their level of sympathy, justification, honor, humor, or other redeeming factors, or B, we can understand how they arrived at their perspective and actions, and somehow this ability to understand them means that they aren't bad. While I understand that a reference pertains to struggles between good and evil, racism applies here because, from both an in-character and out-of-character perspective, these actions are considered violent and deplorable. One can understand the logic and reasoning behind why coaches do what they do, but I would argue that most racists would not claim their senses are right. Instead, they would say that they are necessary. This highlights the clash between ideals and philosophies and the morality present in this game. When people tell me that the in-game world is not the same as the real world, that might have some accuracy. That doesn't mean that there are no standards or moral beliefs in Elanthia. The actions of the Kiramon and Krovan are deplorable at best. Otherwise, you can justify anything, and nothing matters. That, my friends, is the essence of gray goop. Let's examine 3 of these changes. The first is the removal of Dark Elf warriors having to sludge through the sewers to enter the guild hall in the east. The second is the negative ambience that were removed from places in the east. And the third is the shift of adverse racial penalties to a neutral entry, with some cities highlighting racial bonuses for specific races. All these updates are a good start. However, their approaches are not without criticisms. First, the Warriors Guild's fiasco change appeared suddenly without explanation. Don't get me wrong, it was a welcome change and a needed one, but it failed to acknowledge the history and the cruelty behind it. This deserved more than just a message on Gemstone IV's newsfeed. It could have been an opportunity to have a story to bridge the gap, to demonstrate progress, to demonstrate change, and repair the wounds of that past. Instead, the situation was there one day and then disappears the next. Due to the lack of clarity, the same could be said for the negative ambient erasures in Tal Valor and Tal Ilistim. Now, don't get me wrong. Many of the players in those cities, being Tal Valorians and Tal Ilistims, actually voiced these changes, and they were very supportive in trying to remove the negative stigma. And so, for that, they have my sincerest thanks. But for the people that were the recipients of these ambiance, who have witnessed and experienced these harsh moments, the magic erasure tactic does little to create meaningful change to them. If your character is shunned through these mechanics in roleplay, this sudden my bad approach without some sort of storyline does nothing to repair that damage. Ultimately, it feels forced, it feels disingenuous, and it feels meta. The final one, the racial penalties removal, was a welcome sight. Know that the pricing and, more importantly, the mistreatment of these races by NPCs helped address some of those issues. However, the justification, the implementation, and the timing felt forced. It can't be ignored that the racial changes occurred a week before the deaths of 2 prominent NPCs, leading to tensions between nations and, unconsciously, races. Some of those bonuses don't quite align. I find it hard to believe Elanthia would be okay with giving Dark Elves a racial bonus. knowing that one of those cultures practices slavery. I might address the slavery issue another time, maybe another video. And so the irony here is that the fix has revealed more problems. The fix was simply a reversal of connotation. It's not a punishment for bad races. It's now a reward for favorable races. If this was the best way to comfort people, fine. But I will not accept this change as a deciding factor in ending racism in Gemstone IV. I remember when this was announced, hearing people shout, "Yay, racism is dead!" And I thought, really? Is that how you think you fix everything? What we had was a fundamental misunderstanding that led to an arbitrary fix accepted by the masses as revolutionary when, in reality, it was just a change in tone to appease those affected indirectly without addressing the core issue. I and many others tend to look at things from an in-character and roleplay lens, so this raised many questions about the enforcement of these bonuses. How did certain races receive these bonuses? What is the impact of these changes in the context of an international incident like what was happening in nations on the brink? What caused Tyliston to see the cruelty of their treatment towards the Dark Elves? Was it the Valley of Gold storyline? What happened to the scrutinized individuals mentioned in those ambiance? Is that lore officially gone? How is it one landing, one price, if there isn't one set price for everyone? Are they really promoting change? Or is this merely a superficial change to avoid the negative stigma from characters and players alike? These questions and more will not be answered, leaving the player and the character to speculate for themselves. And in some cases, the intentions of some players are not to address the issues, but rather for their personal gain. I mean, let's be real. In GM Marioff's original thread, asking about the issues involving Dark Elves and racial penalties when she was the Dark Elf guru, some people wanted racial penalties removed because of loot cap. Those individuals said they wanted the cruel words and the actions to remain, but they wanted their goods to be bought and sold without the racial penalty.
Huh?
You know, there are reasons why people boycott clothing, music, food, and other events, right? It's the racial actions committed under the brand's flag that led to these choices. Respectfully, this train of thought about concern only for the silvers adds to this mixed signaling and does little to nothing to attack the heart of the issue. And yet, because of a refusal to accept the cold, hard truth, these voices often drown out those most impacted and distort those valid criticisms. If you do not think there are racial issues or care little for them, or have your own personal agendas, then of course you will focus on pricing as the catalyst. This well-intentioned mishandling of the circumstances leads me to emphasize the importance of the philosophy of Chesterton's fence. In the first video, I expressed the fence erected from the game's lore and the ramifications they created. I alluded to Chesterton's fence to present the unfounded dilemma of these actions. For those unfamiliar, it goes a little something like this. There exists in such a case of certain institution or law, let us say, for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, "I don't see the use of this. Let us clear it away." To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, "If you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it." Now, for the record, I do believe that this is a terrible, harsh, barbed-wired, cruel fence that has been erected in the lore of Gemstone IV. But it is a fence nonetheless. The impact of removing these racial comments without understanding the complexities behind their creation only served to widen the divide between players and cities in the game. An honest approach that explained Gemstone lore weaves around these tropes and motifs of racism to craft a story and establish a lore would help foster a deeper understanding for raising awareness, and then taking meaningful action through well-crafted storytelling, rich character journeys, and significant choices to create change. That is why I held GM Wyram's words close to heart. Instead, we have an approach that states, there may have been racism, but it's gone now. If those ideas remain, you can choose to ignore them despite your character's journeys, while also saying you should not draw upon real-world comparisons no matter how obvious because it's just a game. Oh, I got something for y'all just the game people. It's coming pretty soon. It's the next video. What we often see to straddle parts of the fence to suit others who can choose to ignore it is something that we like to call polite racism.
Diet racism, because you just don't get it.
This, historically, is far worse than blatant slurs for several reasons. 1, it impacts that politeness removes the sting of racial disharmony when it often sharpens it. 2, it insults the person's intelligence as they recognize said racial dismissiveness. 3, it implies that the worst of said disharmony comes solely from the verbal slurs and not the systematic nature of how it's been historically used. This house of cards falls apart for the recipient of said racial cruelty. Therefore, when defenses are used such as, well, Hellgriff is polite now, or it's only 1 bar, are used as defenses to maintain racial tension. The point missed is that the town accepts this as normal and, therefore, endorses the behavior. If that is what these people want, then go ahead. But you can't have it both ways. Saying things are better or we are welcoming is dishonest if you cling to those old ways, polite or not. There's only forced tolerance and prejudice that is poorly hidden, but it loses impact if someone has seen it and that experience lingers. To give an example, my boy Drayler's first experience playing the game was entering Hellgriff and getting the negative comment of his presence as an Elanthia in Hellgriff. You don't just forget these things from an out-of-character experience, but you definitely don't forget these things from an in-character experience. Lost in all of this is the longevity of Gemstone, who have been playing since the 90s, and their memories are not short. In my 5 years of playing, Yardie has spoken to many characters who refuse to go east because of comments from players and NPCs that have shaped their worldview. To them, nothing has changed. It's a shame because progress has been made. However, reactions to conversations have led others to believe it's all superficial. There's also not a big stage for it. And if there has been a stage for it, it's been done in such a confined space that those who need to see these changes have not. To those who argue that politeness and civility in the face of bigotry are acceptable, I say this. You are engaging in a Disneyfication of racism, and those attuned to its harsh realities will find it far more demeaning than outright slurs and oppression. Self-awareness and honesty are crucial here. While you may think this approach helps, rest assured, it does not. There are dark elves in Tavalore, as it is a starting city, who have voiced their displeasure towards the fakeness of it, knowing that no matter what they do or how hard they try, they will never be accepted. That the courtesy is a forced one, and despite the niceties, nothing has changed. This mixed messaging hards the town's identity because its citizens say one thing while the town says another. And this does a lot of damage to the great people over there. Oro, Aga, Crystalina, Orsis, Alicia, Laram, which your name is too long to pronounce. Yo, I see y'all, and I thank y'all for being who you are. I didn't forget y'all like Ty and Phaedra and the Tavalore Social Club. And by the way, if I was anybody else that I did not mention, if I forgot, forgive, but I know who you are and you're there in heart and mind. To give an example of some of this confusion, for example, when Yardie voiced that Tavalore had slowly improved despite having a long way to go, a certain character scolded him, telling him to stop projecting his feelings upon others. He was dismissive that those experiences and encounters were made up. What was unknown to said character was at that very exact moment, 2 dark elves in their native tongue voiced the same issues in front of that same group. And since they didn't speak Dark Elven, they didn't notice. Those 2 dark elves, mind you, were people who frequented and even lived in Tavalore. This is the problem that arises with mixed messaging. One side, who is not the recipient of said racism and is a beneficiary to not receiving it, argues that matters have improved and it undoes the harm of the people that are receiving said racial tension. The other side, whose recipients, argue that it is superficial and hollow at best, and then they get called out for being hypocrites and, my personal favorite, racial antagonists. This leads to no side listening because they take offense to anything said. And the result? Nothing changes. And deeper frustrations on sides with the best of intentions remain. Dumbing down the rhetoric while preserving it and then trying to sanitize it is that proverbial band-aid on the wound, and that knife still remains stabbed in the back. Removing the fence of racism too quickly without careful scrutiny has done more harm than good to many of their GM-led stories. And players have argued about the character and players' intentions of others within those stories. The Winter War aimed to examine the tensions between the Valorians and Icemeal, and it used the historic deal which allowed Valorian airships to pass through Icemeal as that backdrop. Many Icemeal characters, like Zorlu, took a pro-Icemeal stance, leveraging the Valorians' troubled history to garner sympathy and to get those Valorian airships out of their territory. While this viewpoint was understood, there were many who recognized that those same characters were using that history for political gain. To many, these Icemealians appeared as aggressors instead, trying to provoke the Valorians into a fight. Meanwhile, many Valorians felt torn between compassion and duty. This was showing another side of valor. Some tried to help the Icemeal refugees by giving them items but were branded traitors by their own kin. Others, like Iskander, respected the Icemeal natives but would follow orders to attack if necessary. Still others sought to suppress the brewing resistance. This made for great real estate for a fantastic story. Unfortunately, the dominoes tumbled against the backdrop of history. While the conflict was rooted in that history, others on the Valorian side opposed the narrative. And in fairness, part of the issue was that the Valorians did not have a GM representing them on their side. At the time, there was no GM, and Castle would be the GM for Valor about a few months later. And Auchand was essentially managing the reins of the story. But the other part stemmed from that history. Since aspects of Valor's history and its complex past were questioned, the story spilled into out-of-character territory. Some feared ending up like in previous stories, vilified for their history and becoming targets of backlash. As a result, some not only dissociated themselves from the story, but also in some cases prevented it from continuing. I understand the reasons for pushback. The negative stigmas toward those who benefit from racial tensions at home can be exhausting. But I call for the story to unfold because many Valorian player characters showed a different, more progressive side of Valor in an effort to shed some of that past, even though it came with challenges and struggles, as all conflicts do. That does bring some difficulty and risk, but also the potential for a rewarding outcome if played out. Of course, that did not happen. And some had expressed that racism was dead in their Discord conversations, but suddenly did not like seeing their history reflected upon them. Missives from GM NPCs weren't passed on, and the story ended with a quiet, flat dissolution of the Icemeal Valor agreement. And those who took offense to my voicing of continuing the story were rather blunt in their feelings. Such a shame, yet such a contradiction. For some of those who wished to maintain some of the racial penalties and restrictions were quick to check anyone who showed them their reflection in the mirror. Nations on the Brink began with promise and had a promising resolution, but concerns about conflict were widespread, which in my opinion is something grossly misunderstood by the masses. And if you don't believe me, just visit the conflict thread in Discord and you'll see what I mean. Cassandra and Sayela's initial plight created a conflict between nations, and it never truly materialized. I think that and the mixed messaging along with the conflict aversion led to a lot of confusion. So there was a stretch where jousting was canceled and then reinstated in Rumor Woods due to the conflict supposedly being so intense. And then you had the mixed messaging with the Cassandra Accords, which I applaud. I think it was a great thing. But the underlying turmoil persisted, creating some new conflicts. So the Accords seemed to upset some groups like the Fandriel, and in others' opinions like Iskander, the Valorians. But GMs were quick to intervene and dismiss those issues, even though confusion and resentment from the side not mentioned, the Accords seemed understandable. In short, people did not want to play into the racial tensions in the lore, and as a result, the ending kind of did a good job of trying to show progression, but kind of fell flat and left a lot more questions than answers. The bigger issue for me in Nations on the Brink came in the beginning with the whole fiasco with the Fangel TriStar and the Betrayer and Nomna. And I got a lot of heat on that. And it was a great example of how the mixed messaging kind of affects roleplay, affects character interactions, and it leads to a lot of out-of-character banter and accusations that I did not much appreciate. And so I'm going to get into that story. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I'm going to get into that as much as I can because, in truth, it was a microcosm of the issues that we're dealing with. The story goes a little something like this. A Fandral sorceress named Anomna and her demonologist husband, Henshaw, animated the corpse of the recently deceased mother of the patriarch in hopes of luring the patriarch's son to the waste and raising the boy in their image. I'm imagining Henshaw's knowledge in demonology and Anomna's knowledge in necromancy would create the perfect Fandral child. Their plan was foiled. She and her husband fled, leaving the De Savray TriStar to find her since they were not in the Basilica. The two sorcerers were later discovered by the TriStar along the edge of Tarnafin, where they had gathered undead at each encampment to stop the TriStar and escape. Anomna and Henshaw built an army strong enough to hold back the Itzir so they could search OTF, Old Tarfandril, for a way to extend Henshaw's life as he was human, old, and wounded. Their mission, to the rest of us, capture Anomna. The TriStar didn't care about the human, despite many signs indicating his importance and knowledge to Anomna. Long and the short of it, the gang of players found the NPCs, tracked them down, and they killed them. Anomna was able to be resurrected, Henshaw was not. From there, after Anomna's corpse was animated and brought to the group and then resurrected, Anomna expressed her love and affection for her husband and his wealth of knowledge. This resonated with my character for several reasons. First, the history indicates that human Fandral marriage would not be tolerated. And half-elves in New Tarfandril are, you already know this. I already covered that in my first video. Anomna mourned her husband's death and addressed the prejudice in NTF as a reason for her actions. This resonated with my character because, lore-wise and player-wise, Yardie has experienced comments about marriage outside his race, and the plight affected him. People have said to him that in terms of some of the marriages that he wanted to have with people that were not Fandral, one person mentioned that the person would make a good second wife, but that it was not ideal for them to marry because they were not Fandral. Again, it was in character. I have no problem with it. I think it's cool because, again, the lore indicates it. My character also thought of people like Paragord and Missoni and understood how they could cause backlash. He kept looking at them throughout the entire circumstance. And I'm sure there are quite a lot of stories where people have commented on multiracial relationships in character to their players and to other characters. So I'm sure this is an issue that's not unfamiliar to people. But to Yardie, at the same time, the sorcerer's actions were not justified. And he said so repeatedly. So when they were being apprehended and judged, Yardie understood the cry for progress, acknowledged that they went about it the wrong way, Henshaw and Anomna, and demanded that they paid for their crimes. And yet, this not only earned Yardie in-character criticism, which give me that all day, but it earned me out-of-character criticism, and even GMs criticizing in comments, based on Yardie's logical and justifiable reactions, as if lore, the words and actions of characters and NPCs and PCs alike were not reflecting this reality presented. Because again, there's no racism, even though Anomna and other characters were saying that there was racism, and the NPCs confirmed it by dismissing Henshaw's life and capture, and the players just went along with that without even questioning it, except for a few people that wanted to comment on it and found it very peculiar. I was once told long ago in an out-of-character lecture that my character's behavior, reacting to certain things that they did, was invalidating their role-play choices. By providing this plethora of evidence that I just presented now from multiple angles, and then lecturing my character's feelings and my character's feasible reactions, those same people are invalidating my role-play choices. And I would argue they were invalidating people like me and others who just want a clear direction to play. This confusion makes the game unplayable. And I think I'll save North by Northwest. I had a lot to say about that. Part 3. But that was a fiasco in itself. I will say, though, there are some things that North by Northwest did really well. And I want to get into that in my third part, which is where do we go from here? Many would applaud the efforts of the devs, staff, and players trying to improve. I'd argue that their intentions are in the right place. In many ways, I join in on the applause. I believe their actions and voices have influence. Conversely, I criticize their failure to listening to these voices, as few and far between as they may be. Many of the changes have been made without genuine dialogue and honestly seem like a reaction to the political climate and self-reflection on the real world. Instead of engaging with those in the diaspora, we're often sidelined by well-meaning individuals speaking for people of color or claiming to represent them, all the while feigning acknowledgement of their concerns. I've already addressed this in the upcoming Palestra trials and how certain half-elves want to participate in that, though lore makes that impossible. I have warned about that becoming a future problem, and though my character believes half-Thandro are Thandro and would have and has spoken out against these archaic rules and wants half-elves to participate in the Palestra trials, the mixed messaging implies that there's no racism, and therefore this will not be a problem until it becomes one. Out of character, I really don't care what decision you guys make. I would prefer that they adhere to the lore, and if there is changes to the lore, I want it to be something that's a big story or some kind of story that basically gravitates towards that direction. But like I was told in regards to the Palestra trials, that'll be handled when the moment arises. When it does, I'll be here, watching and waiting. Hopefully the next video, the last video, I'm probably going to do a comment video as well, but the last video will offer some ideas on where to go before that and other issues blow up in people's faces.